Hey everyone, welcome to the real main stage. So this is collaborative Bitcoin transactions, and let's just do some brief intros, and then we can dive into it. I'm George Kaloudis. I do words at CoinDesk, and we can just start from Craig and come down.
Sure. I'm Craig. I build Sparrow Wallet.
Woo! You just saw him earlier. So.
I'm Jeff from Fulmo. We do a lot of Lightning things. So it's like, basically, I'm not a specialist in any one thing, but more like a generalist, and that's why I'm interested in Lightning and also privacy aspects of it. So that's why I'm here.
I'm Zelko. I'm the co-founder of RoninDojo, and so full nodes and privacy is what we do.
Cool. And so, like everything in Bitcoin, collaborative Bitcoin transactions have this really funny name because in reality, all Bitcoin transactions are collaborative, right? There are two parties that are transacting or two people that are working towards transactions happening. That's obviously not what we're going to talk about here. That's super boring. Collaborative Bitcoin transactions allow two things, at least in my head. I think about Lightning. You mentioned Lightning, and I think about fast, cheap peer-to-peer transactions, but then I ultimately think about privacy, right? And I'd like this conversation to eventually coalesce to that one main point, to talk about privacy. So let's coalesce, right? We're going to talk about what do we mean, why do we need, and what we need to do. So what, why, what again. So Zelko, what's a collaborative Bitcoin transaction?
Yeah, so collaborative Bitcoin transactions are when two parties or more are working together to create a transaction, right? So the whole point of creating that transaction is to add doubt onto the blockchain. As we know, the blockchain is public and verifiable. Anybody can go into any block explorer and see what your transaction looks like. So the whole point of doing transactions with one person, another person to make a spend, or to do something like a coin join, is to add that doubt. I want to make it so it's not obvious. It's not a simple spend. It's not obvious that I'm the sender, that's the receiver, this is my change. And with that, there's a bunch of different kinds. We have something like what Samurai has as a Stonewall X2, where it looks like you can't tell which output goes to which person. You can tell it's an output, but it adds doubt, right? And then there's the super magical Stowaway, which was the first pay join, where the person who's receiving is also collaborating. And you make this simple spend. It looks like a simple spend, but you have no idea on the blockchain how much is actually being spent. If you've never done it, I know we were just talking about it off stage, but I know Craig has done it, and it's the first time you do it, it's kind of blows your mind, and it's still my favorite transaction to do. So we can always demo that if you want to come by the Ronin booth. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, nice show up there and there. Craig, I want to ask you, you're a wallet developer, and you just did your workshop earlier. What are you doing to make these collaborative Bitcoin transactions easier to use and more intuitive? Because I want to operate under the framework that privacy is good. I don't want to have that argument up here right now. Let's talk about how you're working that into your wallet.
Sure. So I'm just going to take a little step back first. And, why do we want to create a collaborative Bitcoin transaction, right? What we are looking to do is to break this heuristic, right? Which is another word for like a rule, and that rule is how can we break the heuristic of what we call common input ownership. So if you listened to the workshop earlier, you would have seen that every transaction has inputs, and that one, we only had one, but you have multiple inputs. And what chain analysis companies do is they assume that all of the inputs to a transaction are from the same owner. And really what a chain analysis is trying to do is to determine change of ownership, right? That they want to see where, if there is change of ownership, who owns the funds at that point. Now, if we can break that heuristic that they use by creating a collaborative Bitcoin transaction, in other words, we don't assume that all of the inputs are owned by the same owner, that introduces a lot of doubt into their work and reduces the probability that they are able to track ownership across the Bitcoin blockchain. So that's really what a collaborative transaction is trying to do, and it's one of the very few methods that we have to be able to take this very transparent blockchain and make it so it's more difficult for people to analyze what we're doing. So that's really the reason that we're actually trying to create these in the first place. So what I'm doing with Sparrow and what Zelko is doing is kind of enabling software to allow us to do that. And I briefly went through one of those collaborative transactions earlier. So what you're trying to do there is to have at least two, but perhaps more people that are coming in. And as you may have seen, with Sparrow, you can basically do that via these two buttons at the bottom. You can either optimize your transaction for efficiency, or you can optimize it for privacy. And what you're trying to do there is, with the privacy tab, is actually create what Zelko described as a stonewall transaction, right? Which is this kind of two inputs and two outputs, and nobody looking externally can see anything different, right? And if you then invite someone else to take part in that transaction, you are actually creating a real collaborative transaction where two people contribute inputs and you get these outputs. There are also other ones, and I'm trying to make it easy to do coin joins, which is really a collaborative Bitcoin transaction with more people in it that creates equal outputs. And that's an even more difficult thing for blockchain analysis, because now you not only have multiple inputs, but everyone has the same outputs, and that just makes it so much more difficult to see what's going on. So my goal with Sparrow is to just try and make these tools easy to access, to really just make the UX good, right? So that people are not trying to jump over a lot of hurdles to get them, but just to make them so that they're just a button click away. And having wizards and kind of demonstrating what's going on, kind of making it a less scary thing to do.
Yeah.
But that's my goal.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And we've talked about privacy twice now, but I want to bring you in, Jeff, real quick. And collaborative Bitcoin transactions kind of sort of include Lightning, and people hear about Lightning on all the other stages. So I just want to ask you how Lightning might fit into this conversation, if at all.
Well, I think it fits in from a privacy perspective pretty well, because, I mean, it's pretty obvious what happens when if you're talking about just channel openings. As a collaborative transaction, like, it's pretty obvious from the outside who's doing that, but you don't really know what's going on looking from the outside. So there's like an added privacy layer. And of course, you can ultimately combine it with other techniques of obfuscating the proceeds, if you will, and the opening transactions. So it's, I would say, definitely a good addition. Also to utilize it sort of as a side, as an off-the-band solution to, for example, to pay for fees for certain services and stuff like that. I like to think about, you talking about heuristics, I like to think about these things not as a rule, but more like as educated guesswork. And the whole goal of these collaborative transactions is basically to make it a lot harder to guess it. Just because I think like calling it a rule, or it's not really like this binary thing where you either know or you don't know, but it's like all about having educated guesses if you want to like untangle it from the outside looking in, like for example chain analysis, and kind of the job of these transactions just to make their life a lot harder and ultimately make it impossible to like achieve what they achieve. Paul was talking about earlier, like. Maybe that's one, I'm not sure if that's one goal, but if some markets are switching to Monero as their currency of choice, maybe the question is, can we make Bitcoin be the currency of choice again? And are collaborative transactions a way to do that?
Yeah, I think a very important thing for everyone to recognize is that they've said the word doubt, obfuscate, right? Shed some shade or shadow and doubt into this. It's not, how do we hide them? We need to just bring doubt into the situation. So Zelko, I want to ask you about that. Are collaborative type Bitcoin transactions the only way we can enable privacy on Bitcoin because of how transparent it is? Can we actually, you mentioned Monero, can we make things not transparent? Is that possible, or is that hurt Bitcoin?
I mean, I have doubt on what we will do or what can be done, I guess, from the core developers on the base layer, right? I mean, trying to change it to something similar to Monero is going to be is a tall task. I mean, we've been preaching for privacy at the base layer for the longest time, and that's kind of why those markets, the ones that won't be said, we've seen it to be doing that, because from a base layer, from like without any additional tools, that's what we're seeing. But that's where it comes back to, hey, like I don't need to ask permission. We can go ahead, if wallet developers can implement these tools that have been developed for them, right, to do collaborative transactions, to add obfuscation, right, coin join your stuff when you're using Whirlpool. I don't really think about the other ones, but when you're using Whirlpool, right, you're having those equal outputs, you're going in, you're adding more groups, you're adding a bigger and bigger set using actual zero link, which is a whole nother technical talk, but having equal outputs, and it can even do something like mix to cold storage. I know that's something that Craig implemented over there, and it's a fantastic tool, so all those hardware wallet guys. But you get to increase that anonymity, right? And that's all it is about, increasing your anon set, increasing doubt on the blockchain, the more people that do it, right? And then you're in this post-mix set, having those tools afterwards to continuously collaborate with other people, right? And then you start to grow this network, this cloud of doubt that's starting from, hopefully a strong coin join like Whirlpool, and then you're using post-mix tools after, and you're continuously adding this big cloud around on the blockchain. And that should be the goal, right? So the more people that are using collaborative transactions, the more that we're working together, the less and less, one, that it becomes a weird thing. The second thing is that it adds another layer of difficulty for all of these chain analysis people who I know they're here today, so they're probably here. Hey, guys. But that's our goal, right? We have to stay one step ahead. And in order to stay one step ahead, we have to work together, right? We have to have these spends, and that's why it's really great that Craig did his desktop wallet. That's why I'm such a big fan, is because one of the biggest hangups as a Samurai guy, or a guy that is a Samurai Maxi, we do support other wallets, but Samurai Maxi, is that a lot of people have iPhones. Just real quick, I know the stream won't see it, but how many people have iPhones and do not have an Android, or iPhone only? Okay, so that's a lot of people, but how many people have a desktop computer or a laptop? Okay, that's like everyone. Cool. So that's why it's great, because Craig can do that. Now you can use these privacy tools because Craig took some of the great work and added his own stuff, and now you can actually have these privacy tools. You can work with everybody. We can start to work together to make Bitcoin more private, more fungible together. And that's really what collaborative transactions should be about. So I see it happening at the wallet level, to answer your question. Yeah. I don't see core developers taking that risk. And that's nothing, I guess, against them. If they could take it personally, I guess, if they want. But I don't see that happening. It's not something we're going to see. The whole point of Bitcoin is to stay transparent, right? Verifiable, and less change is good, right? I guess.
Yeah. You keep talking about tools. Yeah. And with these tools, we're going to have some sort of coordination, right? So, Craig, how do we handle the coordination of people using these tools, right? Because you're building something, you're building something, you're building something, y'all are building something. How do we handle coordination in a way that's good and maybe decentralized, maybe, I don't know.
Sure. So, what we ideally want, Bitcoin obviously is a decentralized system. That's what gives it the strength that it has. And obviously, if we introduce any other elements into it, we want that same thing for it. So, when I'm trying to build on Sparrow, I'm always kind of looking at that. But obviously, that's not the only thing that one wants to consider. You also need to consider, are people actually going to use the tool? Because if you have a tool that's too difficult to use, because, for example, you've got to go and find your own coordinator somewhere out there using, some kind of difficult-to-use system, then no one's going to use it. So it's a balance, really, and that's really the tension that we always have. More generally, it's not just a Bitcoin thing, but we have privacy on the one side and convenience on the other, right? And we have that with our phones, with all the technology that we use. And trying to strike that balance is the key kind of thing. So with the choices that I've made, I've kind of looked not only at what the tool does today, but the direction in which it's going. So, for example, Whirlpool uses a centralized coordinator today, but that is busy being changed. So the Samurai team are working on making that into a decentralized platform with a single pool. And I think that that's important as well, right? Zelko was talking about us all working together. And the way that we can do that is basically we are all kind of, the way that these chain analysis companies work is they kind of cluster us all into and say, well, that's a big cloud of people, and we're going to say that they all kind of are placed together. And they'll put an exchange in a cluster, and they'll put this kind of thing. When we take part in Whirlpool, we effectively just go into this big kind of cluster, and we're all anonymous within that, right? And that's kind of the advantage of the single pool. So that was one of the major factors that kind of drew me to Whirlpool was this idea that it's relatively easy to use and kind of allows us to have this big single pool that we can all get into, and we can be anonymous within this pool. So that's, yeah, I think that's kind of how I see it and how I kind of work towards building these solutions into Sparrow.
Yeah, Jeff, I'd love to hear if you have anything to add there from your perspective at Fulmo.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we have open source protocols. Open source is probably the answer. Like, try to make as much as accessible to everyone, so people can build on top of it, integrate it, and then eventually you will get like some traction where these clusters, for example, are big enough that you can't untangle without beyond reasonable doubt. For example, I think there's a saying: anonymity loves, privacy loves. You know which one I'm talking about, right?
Privacy loves
company. Yeah. That's what I meant. Yes, privacy loves company. So the more you build on it, and the more you use these solutions, the better it gets. And there's several ways to achieve this. I mean, there's a couple of projects out there that are usually based on open source solutions, and people can take a look and just integrate it. Like you integrated the Whirlpool and Sparrow, and there's other projects that integrate together. I mean, one example that's on the top of my head is Trezor doing Wasabi. Without judging, I know you're grinning already. but I mean, these are collaborations where you just reach more people and you create bigger masses. And I guess that's ultimately the thing you want to achieve: make it accessible to as many people as possible. Yeah. Basically, by being as transparent and as open about it as possible.
Yeah, a quick follow-up to that then. You're talking about the masses, more people. Why do these discussions about coin joins and join market, these collaborative transactions happen on these side stages and not on the Nakamoto stage? Why is it so unsurly? Why do people not want to talk about it on the main stage? Why are we over here talking about this?
Because it's not really sexy. Open source is you need to know your stuff. It's not.
So is there a marketing problem? Do we need to market this better?
I think if you look at the trends, like the more successful you are, it's usually connected to how good the marketing is and how good the interface is. So looking at, if you take three big like CoinJoin projects, there's Samurai, Wasabi, and Join Market. Sure. And Join Market is like by far the smallest because it's also the hardest to use, and that's also changing because now there's a web UI for that called Gem, and so that's probably also part of it, like just to make it more accessible and easier to use or integrate. Yeah.
I'll follow up with that one. I think that the biggest reason why we're here, not on main stage, is the fact that if you go downstairs and you walk around, right, you see a lot of money that gets dumped into this. Right, a lot of money, a lot of people, whether it's VCs or whether it's actual exchanges and et cetera. Like, exchanges don't make money on privacy, right? No matter how much we want them to. And to be fair, we have a lot of contacts, a lot of places, and friends in places that just want to work a job. And a lot of these people at these major exchanges are huge privacy fans. Like, a lot of them reach out to us at Ronin and are like, hey, like, we love your guys' stuff and whatever, and we know that we're kind of like the opposite of you, but that's okay, right? And the reality is that if everything was private, right? If Bitcoin was as private as Monero, right? And not saying good or bad about that, but if it was that private, or if people cared as much about privacy on Bitcoin as Monero, people would start to get worried about the price, right? That's the reality, is that people would start to be worried about, oh, well, how are we going to make money, or how is it going to get regulated? Like, how many regulators are in here trying to get Bitcoin to be as regulated as possible so it can get mass adoption, right? That's really what it comes down to, is how do you want to get mass adoption? Do you want to get mass adoption through transacting and using Bitcoin as digital cash, or do you want to get mass adoption through the easiest means possible? And the reality is that the easiest means possible is through regulation. And it's a hot take for sure at this kind of conference, but I'm a big believer. And that's why I like how this crowd's full right now, which is pretty awesome. And it's a signal, right? Like, this is not noise, this is signal. You guys are all out here because you actually care, right? People care about privacy, and we know that it's important, but it's really hard, right? Like, how many more people would probably be out here on the main stage? But it's good, right? We're growing. We're getting that movement going. We're making it easier. So I hope that you all are taking these steps forward, right? Because taking back your privacy and starting to work within the bounds that we can, right? Like I said, don't hold your breath on it happening at a core level. Support the wallets that you want to support that have this stuff. Sparrow Wallet, Samurai Wallet, whatever you want to use. Ideally, you don't want to continue to be tracked and working with chain analysis if you're a regular user. You should care about privacy. You should care about that because it's not illegal to care about your privacy. It's not illegal to have that basic human right. But what we like to say, and it's on the back of my shirt, is privacy is a human fight. It's not a human right anymore. Yeah. Not anymore, at least.
Craig, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo what Zelko said. Wanting to be private is nothing unusual, right? When we talk, we sort of the language we use might sound a little bit off-putting, almost in a way. We're sort of introducing doubt and all of these kind of words, right? But actually, if you really analyze it, we have an open and transparent blockchain. Every transaction can be seen, and that's an unusual thing, actually. Right now, we live in this fiat world where we don't see each other's transactions, but of course, the banks and we assume the governments see them. What we want to create with Bitcoin is not something worse. We want to create something better. And if we have a completely open blockchain and all transactions can be viewed on it, then we have the potential to go down a road where everyone knows everything about every transaction, right? That's the reality of what Bitcoin is, right? It's not Monero. It's a different system. Yeah. So using the privacy tools is literally as essential as avoiding that end game, that point. And I think that's kind of, for me, why it was so important to build them in. And really, if I was to describe Sparrow, I'd probably say it's a privacy wallet first, right? Yeah. That's super important to me. And I think it's because I don't want to end up in that world where every single transaction is known to everyone, right? I think that, there are times maybe if you are you're a trust, you're trying to receive donations or whatever, there might be a place for that. But for the normal human being, they want to have privacy in the transactions they create. And using the tools, and as Zelko was again saying earlier, that's the way in which we achieve that goal. So I'd just like to encourage everyone, use the tools, learn to use them.
Yeah, 10 seconds.
Yeah, if you want to learn what happens if you don't have the tools, don't use the tools, and get wrongful attribution, I would highly recommend coming to the talks of Roman Sterlingov this afternoon, where he's in prison right now for allegedly running a Bitcoin mixer 10 years ago. And right now, everything looks like it's just completely made up by basically Chainalysis and the US government. So use the tools, but also learn why. And if you want to learn why, come back later this afternoon and learn about the case and learn about how to free Roman.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you guys for listening. That's it.
Thank you. Good job, man.
Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.